Years ago, teenagers racing in their car killed a young mother and her baby. The young men are now in prison, but the fallout is far from over. There is a growing movement on social media to free one of the men.
Sending a young man to prison for that long of a time period, I think is excessive.
If you got in trouble, would you use your good looks to prove your innocence? What if you just took a life or two? In Herrin's case, it seems like he has no problem acting like an innocent pretty boy. In fact, he shows no regret in taking the life of a mother and her one-year-old baby. From prison, he complains about the tragedy he's going through, and hordes of TikTok users are pleading for his release. Why? Because he's too pretty for jail. That's right. This is what some teens online are saying, but it's doing a world of bad to a family already stricken by grief and despair. Jessica's widower David talks about a wife and a baby lost in a matter of seconds to a reckless, remorseless teen. And yet, the internet seems to side with the teen. What did Cameron do that day? Where is he now? And is there a chance he'll be released, or is this just a silly internet wave? This is the full story of Cameron Coyle Herrin. He was a regular 18-year-old, living with his family, focusing on high school graduation and getting ready for college. At least that was the first impression. Cameron was more of a bad boy. He was happy, school was over, and he wanted to do reckless things with his brother and friends. Typical teenage behavior, you might say, except Cameron would take it up a notch. In 2018, Tampa Bay was also the home of 24-year-old Jessica, David, and baby Lilia Robinault. Jessica and David had just moved to the area to start a family. It had heavenly weather, was affordable, and most importantly, it had a low crime rate. It seemed like the perfect, uneventful place to raise a kid. But things couldn't end up worse for Jessica, David, and Lilia. Moving to Tampa Bay was a death sentence for the young family. May 23rd of 2018 was such a catastrophic day. That's because that day, Cameron and his friend John Barrineau were racing on Bayshore Boulevard and going over 100 miles an hour. The two friends had been racing around the area for days on end. On one of the previous days, Cameron had reached 162 miles per hour. Cameron had a new Ford Mustang, and it was all he cared about at the time. He and John would race in broad daylight on busy roads with frequent pedestrian crossings. On May 23, 2018, Cameron crashed into Jessica and her baby daughter Lilia as they were crossing the road after a walk in the park. He was going 102 miles per hour in a 40-mile area. Jessica was killed on the spot. Her baby daughter died the following day at the hospital after suffering injuries so graphic they can't be described here. Just look at this devastating picture of Lilia's stroller left at the crime scene. These were the consequences. Except even after they came crashing down, Cameron did not seem that affected. That afternoon, David Robinault arrived at Jessica's uncle's home to pick them up, as they'd arranged. When he noticed their absence, he knew something was wrong. Jessica's uncle didn't know what was going on either. The more they called Jessica to no avail, the more they worried about their safety. Just as they were about to phone authorities and report them missing, they turned on the TV and they saw the news. Imagine learning your wife and baby have just been unalived from live TV. I collapsed in absolute fear. She told me that Jessie and Lilia were hit every day since, when we wake up to the same reality and the same nightmare. It was a reality David and his family simply couldn't accept. They still can't. David never got the chance to say goodbye to his wife and baby, and the way they went makes it all the more outrageous. A couple of teenage boys recklessly racing down a populated boulevard had just annihilated his family, the love of his life, and their one-year-old daughter. No one should have to live through this. As David was trying to cope with what had just happened, so was Cameron. He had never imagined speeding through busy neighborhoods could have real consequences. Of course, his parents had told him to be careful, but he didn't connect their words to reality. He was a thoughtless teenager. Within the hour of the horrifying crash, Cameron was arrested, together with his older brother Tristan, who was in the passenger seat, and John, who was driving the other car. Cameron and John were illegally speeding in broad daylight, and they were wholly responsible for the deaths of Jessica and baby Lilia. This was vehicular manslaughter, but the trials wouldn't be straightforward. For 3 years, the boys' families defended them in any way they could. Witnesses would help both the defense and the prosecution, and the judge kept delaying the verdict. On top of everything else, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and the justice system suffered severe delays like everything else. In December 2020, Cameron was supposed to have his trial. But his defense team pulled yet another stunt. Yes, Your Honor, we are going to enter an open plea.
Yes, Your Honor, we are going to enter an open plea.
Is Mr. Barano still going to trial, or is he also entering an open plea?
No, Your Honor, we have reached a negotiated plea agreement as it relates to Mr. Barano.
An open plea meant that Cameron would let the judge decide what the right punishment would be for him. This meant there would be more delays in court and more chances for Cameron to find a deal that would get him a light punishment. But in early 2021, David urged the judge to speed up the process. He'd had enough and wanted to get at least some degree of closure from this horrifying ordeal. I have suffered horrifically every moment.
It is nearly impossible to put into words the agony of this legal process.
Exactly. It's one thing to lose your family this way, and another to have to sit in court for years on end, reliving the nightmare. Finally, in April 2021, it was time for a verdict for the 2 boys driving that day, Cameron Herrin and John Barano. John, well, he made a move no one expected. He would plead guilty to vehicular homicide and unlawful racing and get 6 years in prison. But hey, it turns out Cameron's plan to enter an open plea wasn't the best decision. Cameron's records of reckless racing for days prior to killing Jessica and Lilia painted a good enough picture of Cameron's mind at the time. He had no regard for other people's safety, even other people's lives, or his own, for what it's worth. He could have easily died in the crash too, or taken his brother's life. David spoke against Cameron too. You've shown zero remorse. The trick behind this is that you are privileged.
You killed a mother and a daughter. You did.
David wanted Cameron to feel the responsibility for what he did. Cameron's defense attorneys, on the other hand, wanted to paint a different picture. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Maher said, "How could he do something so stupid?"
He's a bright kid. It is because the stop and think part of the brain, the frontal lobe, where we stop and think about our action, is not developed.
To David's dismay, Cameron's family kept describing Jessica and Lilia's murder as a tragic accident. They also kept reminding people that it had been just as devastating for Cameron as it had been for David and the Raubenold family. Cameron's family spoke of the tragic ordeal their son is going through after going through a shocking incident.
The impact plays over and over in his head. It'll never go away.
An incident that he caused and that resulted in 2 lives brutally taken away from this world. There is not a malicious bone in his body. It has been devastating for him and our family. Of course, Cameron's life would never go back to normal. But that's because of the choices he'd made, and the judge knew that all too well when he handed him his sentence. So, on count 1, vehicular homicide, the court's going to adjudicate the defendant guilty, sentenced him to 9 years in a Florida state prison. On count 2, same charge, the court will adjudicate the defendant guilty, sentenced him to 15 years in Florida state prison. Cameron's huge eyes say everything. Clearly, he did not expect a 24-year sentence. His friend had received 6 years behind bars. But Cameron did not realize that John was not the one whose car took Jessica and her baby's lives. A good lesson for entitled teens worldwide. He spoke at his sentencing. I hope that this sentence will
inspire younger folks to behave in a manner that is appropriate amongst our streets.
Here's where this case takes a nasty turn. Cameron soon became a viral face on TikTok. People wanted justice for him. More exactly, for his pretty face. TikTokers worldwide would post videos of Cameron in court with broken heart emojis and hashtags like #Justice for Cameron Herrin and #Free Cameron. And soon it wasn't just TikTok. Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook would get flooded with Justice for Cameron hashtag. Most posts were from the Middle East and from the United States. and most of the people posting were young girls who thought Cameron was simply too cute to spend 24 years in prison. Some videos of Cameron reached 1.7 billion views on TikTok. Even Cameron's mother said the trend was disturbing, almost like an obsession, an unhealthy obsession. Romanticizing criminals is never a good thing, and asking for a lesser sentence for someone just because you find them attractive is wrong and unfair to others on so many levels. It begs the question, if John Barrineau was at the wheel of the lethal car that day, would teenagers around the world have stood up for him too? This trend became so huge that social media companies had to investigate whether these were even real people taking such an interest in Cameron. As it turns out, it was part real people. People created the trend. And the trend largely revolved around the same idea. Cameron was too pretty to be a monster. Do we really believe that? Are monsters always ugly? Do they have horns, laugh manically, or smell bad? Short answer, no. Anyone can commit an unspeakable crime. We really shouldn't find excuses for people we find attractive. Everyone is equal in the eyes of the law. Unfortunately, there is a phenomenon called attractiveness bias. Several studies done over the last 50 years concluded that attractive people escape consequences more often. And in negotiation cases, they often end up paying less. People found generally attractive even have better odds of getting a job offer. There's also the case of hybristophilia. This means a romantic attraction toward a criminal, their notoriety, and the danger associated with it. It wouldn't be the first time. Ted Bundy found a wife while on trial for unaliving dozens of women. So according to psychologists, the Herrin phenomenon is not that unique. However, it's really sad. That is not what Cameron should receive attention for. Hundreds of Twitter and TikTok accounts were taken down as a result of this internet trend. But while several teens were speaking up for Cameron, there were also dozens of people sending threats to Cameron's family, including his recent fiancée, who started dating Cameron after the crash. Speaking of hybristophilia, Cameron is thus kept in solitary confinement at the moment as a precaution. If this sounds a bit harsh, David reminds us all of the pain he has to live with every single day.
For you to understand that you've created everlasting pain and depths of sorrow.
Remember, when you're young and feel on top of the world, your actions still have consequences. All actions do. You can have fun without putting your life and others' lives in danger, and just saying, I don't think any teen needs a 460 horsepower car for their 18th birthday. As Cameron is forced to take responsibility for his reckless behavior, let's just hope David and what's left of his family are able to recover from this terrible tragedy. What are your thoughts on this case? And before you go, don't forget to check the next video.